5th, 2009, I staggered into the middle of the street in downtown Boise, Idaho. I was dead drunk and stoned and loaded up on prescription medication. I waved my arms in the air, and when the police cruiser stopped, I announced that I had a felony warrant and I was ready to turn myself in. The year before, I had planted a medical marijuana garden in the basement of a house I had rented there. It was discovered by my landlord, who then notified the police. I had 80 plants, which sounds like a lot, but most of them were quite small. I was addicted to Valium then. I was self-medicating because I did not have access to medical quality cannabis. And so my due diligence was not very diligent, and I failed to realize that in Idaho, planting a single cannabis seed makes you guilty of the crime of marijuana trafficking. And if you have more than 50 plants, there is a mandatory minimum sentence of 3 years in prison. My mugshot was actually in the paper, because in Idaho, somebody growing weed in their basement is a big deal. And I think you can see from the photo that this is not a healthy person. This is not a person who's making a lot of good decisions, to put it mildly. I was in county jail for 14 months trying to fight my case. My attorney tried to challenge the probable cause and the warrant. He tried to move the case to mental health court. He tried to get it knocked down to possession with intent to distribute, but the DA wouldn't budge. He said 3 + 7 was the only deal. So 3 years in prison with a 7-year tail, so 7 years of parole. And if I pled not guilty and I took it to trial before a jury selected from the fine men and women of Ada County, Idaho, I would surely be convicted, and the judge would probably give me 5 + 10 for a total of 15 years. And so after a great deal of deliberation, I pled guilty and I signed up for the 3 + 7. But there was a silver lining to this dark morass of grime and addiction. An old colleague of mine, Professor Luca Kamai at UC Davis, had become aware of my plight and offered to sponsor me as a graduate student in the plant biology program there, which is widely renowned as the best in the world. And so when my 3 years was up, I was able to transfer my parole to the California Department of Corrections. And so for the last several years, I've been both a University of California student and also a parolee, which gives me a somewhat unusual perspective on California values and how this state actually works. I'd be happy to talk more about this experience with anyone who's interested, but for now I'd like to focus not on what this situation says about me, but what it says about the Republic of California. The first day I arrived here, I went to check in at the parole office in Woodland in Yolo County, just west of Sacramento. There's a big bulletproof glass window and then a little intercom box. So I push the button, I tell them who I am. My PO comes back and he says, "So you're just here for marijuana?" I say, "Yes." And he says, "That's it? Just marijuana?" I say, "Yes." And he says, "And I have to watch you for 7 years?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't get it either, but that's how it is." And I want to contrast that experience with my parole hearing in Idaho. That's when you sit down before a panel of 3 parole commissioners and they interview you before they decide if you're rehabilitated enough to be released from prison. My panel was 3 white men, all of whom appeared to be over the age of 70, and I later learned that 2 of them were beet farmers. Sugar beets are a major crop in Idaho, just to give you a sense of the demographic. They were not happy about me bringing my medical garden to Idaho, and they let me know it very clearly. They said, "We've seen what happens with medical marijuana in California, and we do not want it here." That's a direct quote. This was in 2012, so just before Washington and Colorado first voted to legalize recreational weed. Idaho is still holding out, which is unfortunate because there's a lot of hiking and fishing and skiing and other cannabis-friendly recreation to be done there. But it might be one of the last dominoes to fall in this hemisphere. The point I want to make is that even though I'm an American citizen, I'm also one of millions of people who has immigrated to California to seek economic opportunity and also to escape political persecution. In Idaho, I was literally viewed as a narco-terrorist by people who have a very rigid view of what adults should be allowed to do with their own bodies. Here, I'm just another guy with a little garden in the basement. I'd like to take a moment to express my deep thanks and respect and admiration to the administrators and workers at the University of California and the California Department of Corrections who approved my interstate transfer and who gave me a job here. I didn't actually meet the guidelines, so I was what's called a courtesy transfer. But my experience would not have been possible without a large number of people across 2 significant state bureaucracies who are willing to take a chance on a small-time pot grower with a mental health disorder. I now have a master's degree in plant biology. I still don't have a job, so it's not all champagne and caviar just yet, but I'm clearly in a better place now than I was 10 years ago today. I was badly addicted to benzodiazepines then. I've been in recovery for 10 years now, and I did get treatment in prison, for which I am also grateful. But that should not be the only way for sick people and poor people to get access to recovery services. I completed a 12-month program called the Therapeutic Community that gave me a lot of tools to avoid relapsing and to make better decisions. But I also spent 28 months just hanging out and playing cards with a bunch of hardened criminals. Psychopaths, child molesters, neo-Nazis, human traffickers, the absolute worst of the worst. I marinated in that environment for years, and it changed me permanently. Friends sometimes ask how prison changed me, and I say it made me a better liar and it made me more manipulative. And those are just the changes that I'm aware of, the antisocial tendencies that I try to manage in order to be a productive citizen and a law-abiding member of society. And there are hundreds of thousands of Californians just like me who in their youth got tangled up with drugs or gangs or drug gangs and did something stupid and did some time and are now stuck in a permanent underclass that is extremely difficult to escape from. So what can we do? Administering mental health services and drug treatment to poor people is not the job of the Department of Corrections. Let them focus on the psychopaths and the chomos and the Nazis, and let's build a publicly funded California health service that can reach out to the drunk drivers and the meth tweakers and help them to get better in an environment that's based on the best science and not on some 19th century concept of discipline and punishment. The last point I want to make today is not always a popular one. It's estimated that in California, the black market for cannabis is at least twice the size of the legal market. Yes, those of us who live here can go to a dispensary and pay a little more for a product that is tested, of known potency, and free from contaminants. But these reports of people dying from contaminated vapor cartridges in Michigan, Florida, Indiana, and so on, these people are almost certainly consuming California-grown cannabis as well. But it's the stuff that's too dirty to be tested and sold legally. This is an industry that is growing rapidly and changing rapidly, but it needs to be regulated and it needs to be legal in every county, in every state. Nobody in the marijuana business likes to talk about the hundreds of thousands of prisoners, 61% of whom are persons of color, who have to waste their lives in prisons across the United States in order to maintain the wholesale price of weed here in California. It's literally the closest thing to institutionalized slavery that exists in America in the 21st century. The war on drugs is a war where white people put black people and brown people in chains solely to protect their profit margins. It really is that simple.
That's right.
The solution, which some might see as radical, is to legalize all drugs, even cocaine and heroin, so that they can be regulated, the criminal element can be reduced, and people can get access to treatment. There's been some experiments in Portugal, Switzerland, and British Columbia, and in all cases, the outcome is the same. You get fewer overdoses and more people choosing to enter into treatment. California has to lead the way on this point, not only with cannabis cafes, such as the one in West Hollywood that opened just this week, but also with safe consumption sites for users of hard drugs, so that they could get clean needles and counseling, so that we can have fewer addicts becoming homeless and fewer homeless addicts overdosing and dying in the street. The homeless situation is now the #1 concern that Californians have about the future of this great state. And in order to address it, we have to address the hard drug habits that frequently lead to people losing everything they own. This is a problem that is very nearly unique to California. It's a scenario that Trump's America does not understand and does not want to deal with. If Trump has his way, they'll just put these people in concentration camps. And so we have to deal with this problem ourselves in a way that is humane and sensible and as much as possible preserves human dignity. The war on drugs is an absolute failure, and it needs to be ended immediately. Finally, I'd like to add that today I also regained my right to vote. California is a state that automatically. Thank you. California is a state that automatically restores that right when a felony sentence is concluded. Many other states, you have to jump through hoops. I honestly haven't decided which party I'm going to register with, but I am looking forward to being a more active participant in California's democracy now that I am no longer disenfranchised. Thank you very much for listening, and I'd be happy to take questions if there are any.
A couple of things. One is that, you're talking about the decriminalization of all the drugs. You're about to get a powerful ally. His name is Andres Lopez.
What
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
The Mexican president
Yes.
is proposing that very thing.
Yes.
The other thing that the difficulty we have, as long as we're attached to the U.S., is getting Medi-Cal to be able to pay for medical marijuana, which they can't because it's federally illegal. Once we're our own country, that goes away and it becomes fully insurable.
Mm-hmm.
So both the mother country and us, we got places to go and things to do in exactly the manner that you're describing.
That's great news. I think that I have watched AMLO kind of here and there when he almost won back in 2006, and I'm pleased to see that he got a chance to govern Mexico, and I think it's great that they're pursuing a decriminalization strategy there.
Yeah.
They've seen much more violence there than we have here as a result of the drug war. I mean, it's hard to compare, but yeah, I think that the trend towards treatment and having that covered as part of a national health service is absolutely moving in the right direction.
Yeah, our national health service, this republic at least.
Do you believe your original arrest, if it had happened here in California, would have had a much different outcome?
So the question was if I believed that my arrest would have had a much different outcome in California. Yes, if I had had a medical card, there would have been no arrest. I would have been within the plant count guidelines for many counties. And the thing that my parole agent told me was that if I had been convicted, it would have been a Prop 64 case. Prop 64 was a citizen-sponsored initiative that reduced a lot of felonies to misdemeanors. And she said that my case would definitely have been something that qualified under that. So the worst case scenario would have been a ticket, basically.
Now, I'm not going to ask you a question necessarily, but I do want to get on the record and comment that Portugal really did pioneer this at a national level, decriminalizing all forms of narcotics, really getting down to the fundamental issue, addressing the unemployment, the economy, and all that. They really addressed this substance dependency syndrome issue as a healthcare issue, as a health issue. So they first went to all the specialists, they went to all the doctors, and they asked them for specific policy points. I'm mentioning this because it's coincidentally, it was my past semester's thesis hypothesis, or pretty much that was the what I focused on for creating a what's the word I'm looking for? Preventative medicine policy. Definitely there was a very strong relation between Portugal's very conservative fascist political policies dating back to their former fascist dictator Salazar. How after they abandoned fascism and pretty much adopted this 21st century or more modern, they moved away from fascism, essentially accepting the free market and capitalist model. The economy tanked. They didn't know what they were doing, and that created a vicious circle of poverty, of economical, strife, where people were just unable to afford, living. In many cases, that led to substance abuse. Mm-hmm. So, there is definitely a strong relation between conservative policy in government and substance dependency syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. As you commented that you went in there and you were with psychopaths and killers and child molesters and which is the double-edged sword of you have a mentally ill population here. It's not getting treated. You know what I mean? And then they're getting in trouble and they're going in jail. And our jails should not be our mental institutions, and that's what they're becoming. And what your comment said is a great example of that. It is a place where there are seriously mentally ill people. It is now, there was a big fight against LA's new jail because they wanted to have a mentally ill, a larger mental health department. It's like, no, you need to send them to a mental hospital, or you need to get them treatment. You're not, prison is not a place to get mental health treatment.
That's right.
Absolutely. And then that comment really crystallized it.
Yeah, it's
How many people would you say that you encountered out of 100% would you say would probably classify to have a mental illness?
between
Would you
20
say
and
eight?
40.
20 to 40?
Well, okay, mental illness including drug
in the
dependence?
prison, yeah, usually a lot of drug dependence is masking mental illness.
Mhm.
That's a lot of
That's
stuff.
probably more like 80%.
Yeah. That's what the statistics have
Mhm.
shown. Actually, the statistics have shown that, the incarcerated, that the majority of them do have quite a bit of mental illness and concurrent, drug addiction. So you have people who are double whammy.
That's absolutely right. And the New England Journal of Medicine, as recently as last year and earlier this year in January, published a couple of articles relating or stating that modern healthcare clinical guides that for example that the American Psychology College is bases their diagnosis and treatments on. Correct me if I'm wrong. They simply are not trained sufficiently enough to treat ailments with benzodiazepines and or the opioids. That these medications are being prescribed irresponsibly. These are veteran physicians saying that they don't know how to prescribe this medication, and what they're doing is creating a vicious circle of client. So I'm gonna give you a benzodiazepine for so you can go to sleep, and that over time, that person, without proper usage of that medication, they will build dependency. They will build a resistance. Exactly.
Even with proper administration, they're going to build a dependency. They're going to build a resistance. They're going to need more for the same effect. And
that's right.
It's like in the 90s, as a nurse, I'm a retired nurse. They had this big push where the pain scale. Pain is the fifth vital sign. That was actually something that was started by the Sackler family. And it was part of the advertising of the executives to try to get the doctors to prescribe more OxyContin.
Yeah.
And, I was taught that that's what I was supposed to do. I wasn't prescribing the OxyContin. We weren't able, and it started coming into the hospital, but I worked in an ER, so we didn't give it out a lot.
Right.
But still, this became the gold standard. You'd had to have this on your charting for the feds to say that you met a federal guidelines, that you were taking care of your patients like that.
Right.
So, Sorry.
No, definitely.
Yeah, no, it's there's a lot of facets to it. I mean, it's very complicated, the physiology and so on. But to mix that together with people who are just shaking down their neighbors or so on, and if a kid who needs money to buy pills breaks into a car, his charge is going to be auto theft, but it's the addiction that's driving that behavior.
Exactly.
So separating that out, and
Absolutely.
I met a lot of young people who had gotten tangled up at 12, 14 years old. They go to the youth authority for a year. They get out, they catch a felony, they do 2 years, they get out, they violate. Before you know it, they're 30 years old, they spend half their life incarcerated. And at that point, there's not a lot you can do. So, I mean, there has to be the what do you call it? The school to prison pipeline needs to be broken
Altered.
and
Yeah.
made into a treatment. There needs to be a treatment option available.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading this study once where they said 80% of the people who committed crimes did so underneath the influence of a substance. 80% of the crimes committed, people were like, well, yeah, I was drinking and I decided to get into a car and here I am in front of you, Your Honor. You know, I mean, and so,
Mhm.
you know, we need compassion.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.